Hello and welcome to the online forest summit called BC Forest, the People's Convergence. This is the second last session of our summit, and it's one of the critical ones. We're talking about strategy and organizing. So tonight the topic is organizing coalitions and organizing individuals, because we can all travel in different lanes and move towards the same thing. And I'm speaking to you here from my house in Grand Forks, which is on the traditional territory of the Sealik, the Sinixt, and the Tunaha people. So welcome everyone, and welcome to our guests. Welcome Mary Leighton. Where are you talking to us from today?
Hello, I am on Lekwungen territory and Wasanich territory around Victoria.
Excellent. And Tracy?
I'm here on the Shishatswaya in Huesam, known as Roberts Creek on the Sunshine Coast.
And Taryn?
I'm still in Sealk territory, unceded territory, also known as Lake Okanagan.
Beauty. All right. So Mary and Tracy have a presentation lined up for us. I think they're going to share some really usable information, and it's going to help us move forward and do something with all of this information that's been shared. A lot of solutions and alternatives have been presented, and the proof is in the pudding. We got to do something with all of this great information. So let's start with Mary. Mary, can you tell us a little bit of the organizing that you've been doing lately?
Absolutely. It's been a relatively short time in organizing, maybe 5 years, 6 years now. So environmental and political campaigns, some electoral campaigns, and now I'm actually becoming a teacher. So I'm finishing my post-degree professional program, and a lot of my organizing work is actually with language speakers from different languages. So you'll find me organizing Language Partners BC right now, and doing some training for organizations that rely on volunteer and supporter, movements.
Beauty. Thanks, Mary. Tracy, what about you? What kind of organizing actions have you been involved in lately?
So for the last 3.5 years, I have been working with Metro Vancouver Alliance, which is an alliance of faith groups and unions and community groups who work together for the common good. And then for the last year, since I moved to the Sunshine Coast, I have been working in the forests of Mount Elphinstone. So I've had kind of a crash course into what's happening in forestry in our province, in the microcosm of my community here on our mountain.
Excellent. Thanks so much, you guys. All right, I'm going to let you launch into your presentation and take it away.
Thanks, Jennifer.
All right. Organizing coalitions and organizing individuals. This is our first time formally putting these ideas together. So it's been a really wonderful push for me and Tracy. And I just also want to acknowledge that we're both choking on smoke from fires on the West Coast right now. So yeah, maybe people out there are feeling it as well, but there's like a bit of brain fog and a bit of like heaviness in the chest as we're trying to breathe and both prepare for fights ahead while we deal with like current crises. So I just want to acknowledge what we're facing right now in this moment.
Yeah, please excuse my scratchy eyes, or my scratchy throat and my runny eyes right now. The smog is thick here.
Tracy, do you want to kick it off with a story?
Sure. Well, first of all, I just want to talk a little bit about Mary and I and our working together. Mary and I have been kind of crossing and interweaving organizing paths over the last 5 or 6 years. We worked together at Dogwood, and we've seen each other through a lot of campaigns, and we love working together. So we like to do these presentations together because we draw out different sides of our story. And it's such a nourishing relationship to find people that you can organize with long term. So this is a picture of us in a forest in Clack Creek. This is the forest behind my house. So if I drive straight up my street for about 5 days, I used to be able to enter this forest. And so I brought Mary here last year, And unfortunately, now it has been logged. So a bit about me is I used to be a tech marketer and kind of got thrown into organizing when the Kinder Morgan pipeline was planned through my neighborhood. I used to live right on the Burrard Inlet, so I would watch the tankers go by, and it got me organizing and thinking about activism. And over time, I started organizing, knocking on doors in our community and realizing that a lot of people were under more pressure than I understood at the time. And I was trying to get them to care about pipelines, but they clearly were a lot more worried about childcare and housing and all these other issues. And so I heard about Metro Vancouver Alliance, which was a coalition of organizations, an alliance of organizations that use their institutional power to build enough power to move on certain issues that matter to everybody. And that seemed pretty exciting to me. And I was looking for mentorship and a place to build my public skills and my ability to engage in democracy. And so that's how I have kind of started organizing and a bit of my journey. So when I moved to the Sunshine Coast, I had a lot of illusions of moving to this wild wilderness place. And then I started just learning about what was happening in the forests of Mount Elphinstone. And I learned that people were actually living here before there were forests here, and that the forests have always been tended and have grown around people, and that has always been a reciprocal relationship. And that really started changing how I think about, you know, protecting the forest. And I'm more thinking about like standing in solidarity with the forest as a way of life and a place, and how that life is lived here on this land. So it has been a really agitational experience for me to realize how BC timber sales doesn't really respect what's happening here, how the forests have always been tended, or also how communities are feeling and the new threats that we're facing around forest fires and all these other things. So here are some pictures of me and the joy that I have found in the forest at Mount Elphinstone. Last weekend, actually, I took these pictures under these beautiful yellow cedars. And this is one of the cut blocks that was protected under the recent announcement, but really it has been deferred for another year. And so this stand has some of the oldest trees in Canada. Some of them are up to 1,800 years old. They're just beautiful yellow cedars. And the other day I was walking through the forest and I found this group of chicken of the woods, and I had already collected some blueberries. And it's such an amazing feeling to go for a hike and then come home with dinner and know that like the forest that you love can also sustain you, and that transformational experience that happens when you go into the forest. And it took me 35 years to have that because I grew up in the city. And so connecting with these forests has really changed me, and I'm grateful for it. But it also has made me realize when I put back my organizer hat on, how difficult it is to fight forest fights in this province. I did everything that I could. I used a lot of the tools in my toolbox to work on saving Clack Creek, but it was logged. And I ended up using a lot of my organizing skills basically to hold funerals in the trees. And I remember this kind of panicked feeling standing in, knee deep in snow and yelling, the loggers are coming, trying to get out of the cut block before they got there. And the interactions that I had with the RCMP, where they were so rude to me and they like threatened to arrest me on the road and really scared me. And then were so kind to these loggers that were from outside our community. And we're laughing and joking around and making fun of the citizens on the side of the road. While we lost something that was really important to us. And it changed how I thought about power analysis and how these decisions are made in such a visceral way. I can still feel it in my body, the stress and panic. But when you're in that stress and panic, you don't see the forest through the trees, if you will. You don't see that communities across the province are facing the same thing time and time again. And that there's also a lot of people who care about it. They might not be standing on the road with you, but I didn't realize how many people in my community cared about that forest until it was gone. And they just didn't know and didn't have the understanding and the political analysis to know that they could have done something to protect it. So I've been thinking a lot about, personally, about what it means to have a coalition of communities that are working to support the end of old growth logging in British Columbia. I think I know what it's like to be in a campaign where you're so stressed out and you're in react mode that you can't think about the long-term policy analysis. And by the time you're done that, you're so burnt out, you need a break, and you kind of lose the momentum that you're building locally just at the time that it's logged. And it's really tragic. So I'm personally really interested in figuring out how we can use the organizing practices that Mary and I have learned and that many people are implementing across the province, and put them together with the incredible scientific knowledge and citizen science that people across the province have been gathering for decades, and then start to knit that together to build enough power to make the change we need to make. Passing it over to you, Mary.
Thank you, Tracy. I want to share a story that I think frames up why I think the organizing practices that I'll be sharing today are both extremely powerful and have limits. So this photo was taken a few years ago at a federal panel that Trudeau set up for people in Vancouver to talk about the Kinder Morgan pipeline. And this was a really big day for me. I remember the day before, I went to the outdoor pool, a kid's pool, and swam laps and practiced what I wanted to say, because I had been kind of behind the scenes as an organizer, getting people involved, supporting people's leadership, encouraging other people to speak. And I was like, all right, I feel ready. I feel ready to stand up and kind of like take the mic for a moment. So I swam my laps and like practiced my lines because I didn't want to read off a paper. I wanted to be able to look at people while I spoke. And then I remember getting into the room. It was like a hot summer day and the room was totally packed. And I had that like sweaty nervousness as I saw, 3 formidable seeming adults at that panel who were taking notes and kind of judging us. And I remember getting up and having my moment to speak. I shared my story of, coming to Vancouver and learning about British Columbia, learning about Indigenous history that I was denied when I was being educated as a young person, and talked about the power I felt we had as people to stand up against politicians. And the amazing feeling I can really remember when like everyone raised their hand and then when people stood up. And that speech, which was only a few minutes long, was recorded and shared. And I think it got like 70,000 views by the like end of the first day. There was like a media piece about it. And we had like a table outside of that place where people were speaking throughout the day, and people came up to our table and like signed up with us and congratulated me on this speech and got more involved. And, I felt really excited because in that speech, I just put into practice the training that I had received as an organizer within just like a couple of years. But to add a twist to this moment, like a few days later, a good friend of mine who was working for a different organization went for lunch with me. And we had lunch, like every month, just to kind of give each other coaching and have friendship, I guess. And she really kindly, really thoughtfully, gently told me how hurtful my actions that day had been, because I gave this big speech, but I also kind of like, at the beginning of the day, set up a table at the front entrance that wasn't part of the kind of group of organizations that were working together. And I directed people to like sign up with us. So what I was really doing was being like, I don't know, I think I've got the strategy. My organization knows best, like come to us. And that wasn't the right thing to do. But I hadn't received training or kind of like encouragement to do the hard work of coalition building and sustaining, because it can be incredibly messy and it does take resources. So this is something that I've just been sitting with over the last couple of years, is like, how do we do that harder work of coalition building so that we can have these really great moments, but they will actually be sufficient as part of like a broader thing. So before we dive in more, as you've kind of already sensed from us, Tracey and I are both like very much still learning. And I think our views and practices are going to really continue to change.
Yeah, Mary, can I jump in there?
Please.
I just heard someone say, all models are wrong, but some models are useful. And so like that concept of, you know, we can learn all these organizing models and they can only go so far as you take them and you make them useful, but some are not useful. And that's up for us to discern. So yes, as Mary said, we're both learning and are showing up with humor and solidarity.
Thank you, Tracey. So as you can see, both Tracey and I have an interest in like what coalitions can look like and the power that they can have. But the fact is, like, a coalition of organizations, groups, etc., is only as effective as the organizations within it. If those organizations can't effectively move their people, then the coalition won't have any power or strength anyway, which means that we still need to go back to these practices of organizing individuals. So let's get into it. Oh, Tracey, there's your quote. So the material that I'll be going through here comes from Organize BC, which in turn comes from Marshall Gantz, who kind of codified a lot of practices which come from many Black and people of color organizers involved in the civil rights and United Farm Workers movements. And if you see things here that you're interested in, there are great places to follow up. So organizebc.ca. And also Organizing for Change offers campaign accelerator programs for small groups, community groups in British Columbia that want to put these practices into work. So we'll start with a case study, just so we can ground this a little bit, and just be thinking like, what kind of stands out to you from this example? So the case study is the Heiltsuk herring fishery, which in 2015 faced an issue in which the Department of Fisheries and Oceans wanted to keep the harvest of herring commercially open, in spite of the Heiltsuk wanting to preserve the herring and the fact that it's within their law. So it's their jurisdiction, it's their territory. So what did they do in this case? What we can see through like media and stories are some of the tactics that they employed. One was standing in front of DFO office on their territory. So you can see that in the photo there, as well as in Vancouver. There were also demonstrations in front of grocery stores that were owned by Jimmy Pattison, who also owned the commercial herring fishery fleet. There were on the water protests, so having boats out on the water when the commercial fishery was set to open, as well as training for community members on civil disobedience and protest training and their rights as citizens. So what was the result? In the end, they did get a ban on the herring fishery as well as shared control of the fishery, which is what they were looking for. So this is like a success story within British Columbia. And I think one of the interesting things is that when we look back, it's like, oh, they did these things and they were successful, but it kind of masks over all of the other parts of organizing. And I imagine like a lot of the stress and consternation and not knowing what would work, the strategizing and figuring it out, which is some of the parts that we're gonna dig into. Tracey, was there anything else though that stood out to you that you wanted to note at this time? Okay. So what I think, yeah, we don't see when we learn about the tactics and the outcome of a campaign like that is the stuff behind it, which is leadership, which is individuals within the Heiltsuk community stepping up and providing this leadership that enabled people to turn the resources they had into the power they needed to get the change that they wanted. And that this is the heart of organizing. So instead of just kind of like throwing darts and running around trying to do things, and sometimes it's helpful to have like a model that helps us walk through it, that helps us reenact the leadership that we saw in that case study. So we're going to walk through a schematic called the Organizer's Journey, which has 5 leadership practices. And I'd ask you to just think about, where do you see these in the Heiltsuk case study? Which ones are you exemplifying? So there's lots of people watching these that are involved in forest fights. You know, which part do you see yourself exemplifying? Which ones do you think you need to work on? All right, here's our graphic. And you can see the little signpost being the 5 leadership practices. So we'll walk through it with the cartoons case study here. So we see this person who sees broken down houses. And they start to tell a story of, all right, if I and some other people like you get together, we can solve this problem. And through that storytelling, the person that they're talking to makes a commitment. And that commitment, that relationship, with enough people allows them to strategize to figure out how they're going to solve this problem. So in that strategy session or multiple sessions, you know, are we going to pressure the government to fix the houses? Are we going to fix those houses ourselves? And then creating structure. So which teams are going to go get the tools? Which teams are going to call the neighbors to come help? Which teams are going to put up flyers inviting people to the Fix It Day? So once that structure is in place, we can move into action. The people who have been mobilized through this campaign get together. It looks like the strategy they've chosen is to fix the houses themselves. And we see this person then looking out, oh, there's more broken down houses. Maybe we can fix those next. So a very simple cartoon schematic, but there's so much in here. And in the Heiltsuk case study, like I say, we saw the actions. So we know about the training, we know about the blockades, we know about the protests. But what we can't see are those other pieces in there. So the people who started telling the story, the relationships that maybe already existed, or the new relationships that got formed, the strategizing that had to happen, and the structure. So who's going to be in Vancouver? Who's going to be on the territory working on this? What roles are people going to take? So all of that background work is harder to see. And I'm going to unpack it a little bit just to help us dig into some of these pieces, because I asked you to think about, what are you doing and what do you feel you could be working on? So in terms of the storytelling piece, are you activating these 3 stories about yourself? So Tracey shared a story that helps me understand her so much. And Jennifer also, through when we first met and started talking, understanding her experience in Grand Forks made me understand her completely, and I understood her values. I felt her call to leadership and why she's helping put this whole thing on. Is there that story of us? What are our shared values? What is our shared experience? Do I feel the connection? So it's not just your story, it's our story. And then what needs to happen right now? So the cartoon guy's like, we need to fix these houses. What's the thing that we need to do right now that I can actually help with? In the storytelling, are you helping people overcome these really oppressive emotions that maybe a lot of us are especially feeling with the smoke and the pandemic right now, of inertia, of apathy, of fear, isolation, self-doubt? Are we overcoming those through our storytelling? When we are building relationships with people, are we imagining them as potential future leaders alongside us? When we're doing that relationship building, are we actually making asks of people? And I'm a huge sucker for a hard ask, so this is like my most jamist jam. If you ask me to do something and I actually understand what it is, I'll probably say yes. If you don't, though, I probably won't. When we are strategizing together, are we adequately assessing whether we can fix the houses ourselves, so that's a power with situation, or do we need to pressure the government to fix the houses? Is someone else the decision maker, the power over? Are we asking these important questions when we're strategizing? What do we want? Who has the power? What about the resources we have and how we can leverage them? If the goal is a mountaintop goal, a huge one, are we acknowledging that we're going to have to hit some nested goals along the way? So maybe we only have enough resources for this much, but are we tackling that first so that we can also bring people in and build our power? When we're structuring teams, are we just recreating the hierarchies that we've maybe experienced in our corporate lives? Or are we doing something more like a snowflake, in which we're accountable to one another through relationships, where we're comfortable because we actually know what our roles and responsibilities are, where we're not overwhelmed by having a million relationships, and where we actually can grow and continue to bring people in. And when we're taking actions, do we see them as something kind of over a timeline? So it's not just this one action, but recognizing that we're probably going to have to escalate to get the thing we want. So all of this and more is kind of embedded within this organizer's journey in these 5 leadership practices. And this is the training that I received when I first moved back from Turkey to British Columbia, because I heard that people were fighting against Enbridge and thought that they could win. And I'd never heard of a social movement, really. I'd never heard of an organizing campaign. I didn't think that people could win things. And I was inspired and came back and wanted to be a part of it. And this is the training that I received, and I think it's so valuable. Once I had something that was kind of like in my hands and tangible that I could put into action, that's all I really wanted to do. And that's what led to me working as an organizer. So I think that there's a lot of richness within these practices, but this is important, but what if you effectively organize individuals with some of the practices we just talked about in your community, and it's still not sufficient to make the change that you seek? And I think that this might be true of the forestry fights, where there are so many local fights all over this province. And either people lose or maybe they get a tentative win, but there's not enough power in that community, no matter how well organized, to get the maybe provincial change that people are seeking. Which brings us to, maybe you need a coalition. I'm going to pass it over to Tracey.
And go back a slide before we get to the
Boom.
maybe we need a coalition. So we're at the point where we have a group of a whole bunch of people who we know are sort of interested in our issue. We know what our issue and problem is that we're trying to solve. But we also don't have enough power. This is what happened in our community. We had widespread support locally for creating basically a corridor that would connect all of the parks so that these large wildlife parks wouldn't become islands of extinction. And the local governments had all approved it for like 20 years. It was in the regional plan, but the province didn't approve it, and it's provincial jurisdiction. So all of the great organizing that this community group had done, like Elphinstone Logging Focus and the Living Forest Institute, I want to shout out to my local groups, who really did a really good job of connecting with tons of different diverse people. They had pastors up there praying for the trees. They had concerts. They were really engaging the community, and they had even convinced all the logging companies locally not to log it. So what happened was there was only one bidder on the block from outside the community, and they got it for the bottom barrel price. The blocks around it, BC Timber Sales, sold for like almost $1 million. That one was 100 grand. And so what happened was all of our local organizing actually ended up just like putting less money in the coffers. Our little group had even done an ecological study and gotten recognized that this is a unique bioregion. And 4 days after it was logged, it was in this Ecology and Diversity magazine. We had done everything right, but we didn't have enough power. And so that is why we're still facing 77 cut blocks along the Sunshine Coast right now. So that's why I'm personally super invested in the idea of having a coalition. Now, the concept of a coalition is based on the need for power. So in order to have enough power to move this issue in British Columbia, we need to have organized power and organized money. Power comes in two forms. And so often people get really excited about the idea of a coalition, and they organize a lot of people, but they don't organize any money. And so they end up burning out, maybe we're ready for the next slide, Mary. They end up burning out the people who are trying to do all this good work. And, you know, this is a long-term project to reorganize how forestry is managed in BC. And it can't just be the same couple of people who are doing it. But often these people don't want to ask for money because they want everyone to be involved. And it becomes very difficult to manage if we're not organizing both forms of power at the same time. So it's really important for us to be thinking about how power functions, because that is also how power will function in the coalition. So I know so many of us have been involved in coalition work. A lot of the people who are going to be watching this have been involved in, 10, 15, 20 coalitions at this point, and not all of them have been very fun. I have been involved in some coalitions that have been pretty rough for lots of reasons, and I've listed some of them here. So they're just messy. A coalition requires people to collaborate, have a sense of humor, to move on things or be patient. But all the interpersonal stuff that we have in our own lives does come up in a coalition. And often, like I said, they're under-resourced. But I want to talk a little bit more about the concept of oligarchy in a coalition before we get going too far here. My impulse when I think of a coalition is to go out and find all the people who care about not logging old growth forest on the Sunshine Coast. And then beyond that, to find all the people across the province who care about that too. But the challenge with that is I also secretly want to find all the people who agree with my strategy for tackling that, and who agree with my own power analysis that I've developed for what's happening in the province. And the reality is I have some knowledge about it, but I only have my perspective right now. And so often when we go about setting the foundational pieces of a coalition, we accidentally go out and look for people who have the same opinions as us, and who look for people who are kind of right, or who are experts. And we end up often having a lot of really good meetings where people all agree, but there isn't any tension to actually move anything. And it's usually the same people who've already been in conversation for a long time, and they already have the same amount of power. So by participating in that coalition, they're not actually building more power and more resources, they're just sort of rearranging it. So a big reason why this happens is because what I find is when someone comes to me with a strategy and it's already baked and they say, sign on, how I think about participating in that is, okay, I will sign a petition. I will give you some money. Go and do your good work. Thank you. And I will feel like that's all I'm invited to do, and that's all that's required of me. I will not think, oh, I'm being invited to shape a strategy here that could be really transformational in my community and in my own life, because I feel like the decisions are already made for me. And I have witnessed this time and time again from organizations. I have done it myself. And we do it because a lot of the things we're working on are incredibly urgent and we don't have time to waste. But that automatically sets up a really transactional relationship that can undermine the holistic and diverse nature of the coalitions that are required to have enough power to move these issues. And the reality is, I mean, I've been in a lot of environmental NGO, ENGO rooms on lots of different issues, and it's often the same people showing up again and again and again. It's the usual cast of characters. And the reality is, if that was enough, we would have already won. And so it's time for us now, I think, and it's time for me, and a bit of a challenge for me is like, I want to build a coalition with people who I don't necessarily agree with. And I want to be a part of a coalition that is an active democracy and a democratic project that actually challenges me to think differently, that leaves me unsettled. I've been to so many boring coalition meetings where I go home and I'm kind of like, yeah, we all agreed. And I am not compelled to take action after those meetings. But I've been involved in a lot of coalition meetings that I'll never forget, you know, where someone put up their hand and they disagreed. And they had a reason for disagreeing, and it mattered. And by engaging in that process of disagreement and agreement, we did politics together. And the people who didn't know as much learned through the process, and the people who were rich in experience and knowledge shared it. And almost always in those meetings, we left with a totally different plan, but a much better one than what we started with, because it accounted for a diversity that we would experience in public life the second we left the coalition. So often we want to define it and make everything perfect before we go and take it out into public. And I think that's understandable and good. And we should have our act together as a coalition before we create a public ask. But if we're not asking a diverse enough group of people to do that, the second we hit public, we're going to hit those exact same issues. And we won't have done the work internally to be able to meet that challenge. So for me, I feel like a coalition, maybe we're ready for the next slide. A coalition that I can see an interest in me personally in being involved in is working to create a really strong local coalition in my community. A community like of, you know, maybe 5,000 people in Roberts Creek and Sam here, that represents the kind of diversity that I want to see involved in the coalition long term. All the different kinds of stakeholders that are part of this, but it's also for me a challenge to think about, you know, who wasn't involved when we first started organizing Clack Creek, and why is it that we didn't have enough power to win locally? But then my hope is that we can continue to work towards a larger strategy. And so when we think about what a coalition can be, it can be whatever we make it to be. And it can be whatever we are willing to put into it. A coalition is something that when it's strong and working, no one's waiting for someone to do something or tell them what to do. We're all bringing our best, our resources, what we have to the table in a united strategy. Now, that doesn't mean we always have to work to agree on everything, but we agree on enough things that we can at least share information and work together. So this is a list of things that I consider a coalition to be. So the first, it's public relationships. You don't all have to like each other. There will be a lot of interpersonal challenge, and a lot of people have worked together on other projects and things have come up. But this is a public relationship. This is choosing to put some private things aside and unite on the personal things that we all share that we do want to work on together. A coalition our purpose is to create power, to create as many people as possible and as many institutional stakeholders to build the power that we have. We share resources. Taryn was saying right before this call that she shares resources with all these groups and they're just constantly sharing news. That's something that a coalition can do really well. And through that, the people who have the time to do the policy analysis can spread that really quickly through the coalition and really develop the depth of understanding in every single little local community group that might not have the resources to do that on their own. But the part of this, or Mary, do you want to say anything before I I finish up on this?
No, I'll hold questions. Thanks.
Okay. So for me, the most exciting thing is that I feel personally like I didn't really get a chance to develop as a public person until my adult life. I didn't have a lot of people who were, it was kind of rude in my culture to talk about politics, to talk about things that really mattered, that had a political bent. And so being part of a coalition and encouraging more and more people to be a part of a coalition, I have just learned so much about myself and my place in the world and my own capacity. I was thinking back to one of my first organizing meetings a few minutes ago where I was so terrified to just even introduce my own name. And through the process of organizing and being involved in these coalitions, so many people have invested in me and taken me aside and taught me things and have challenged me to take on new skills, but have also helped me to develop a more nuanced understanding of how things work. And so often that is a privilege that's afforded to a very small segment of our population. And I think that there's something really exciting about a coalition being a place where we can start distributing that knowledge and share that, and then also create a reciprocal relationship of learning. So I just see the concept of a coalition as a really exciting place. And I know that Jennifer and Taryn have been doing a lot of thinking about what a coalition might be. And I'm here for it. I'm excited. Thank you.
And perhaps now is a good moment, though I know this conversation will go on, to plug the fact that there is a next step for folks who have been involved in this wonderful conference. Yeah, so on Thursday, there will be a meeting for folks who want to continue this work and kind of continue this conversation about what it could mean to work together. Yeah.
And I'll just note that I know a lot of the presentations before this one have been a lot more technical and have really given you a lot of groundwork and language and facts and stats and ability to articulate what's happening in our forests in a totally new way. I would also like to have a follow-up conversation after this meeting about coalitions, because I know that we can only touch the beginning of that in this session, and really a coalition is something that we develop together and in conversation, and it's not something that the four of us can decide in this one meeting. So I'm really excited to both be there at the follow-up meeting on the 24th, but then schedule a follow-up meeting specifically for those who want to bring their talent and their resources and their organizations' talent and resources to the table to talk about how we resource a coalition appropriately to win.
Yeah, for sure. We want to win. We're not in this for more of the same. We're in this for something bigger, something different, something exciting. We're on our way. We're moving forward. So yeah, so really great stuff, you guys. Thank you so much. And thank you for talking about the meeting that we're having on the 24th. We're inviting people who have ideas to contact us at forestmarchbc@gmail.com. I had made a video, I don't think everybody saw it, but there's lots of different lanes, lots of different paths to success. And I've called this a convergence for a reason. And I don't know, some people may have seen like an overhead of the streets of Paris. There's this one section where there's a circle in the middle and all the streets are leading to that circle. So that's what we're converging on here. We're converging on something better for our forests and something better for our communities in BC. And there's not just one road to get there. And it's not just about people who have particular skills. It's not just the people who have organizational skills. We need the people who have the research skills. We need the people who want to be on the ground. We have people who like to be out with signs. Maybe you're somebody who likes to get your hands dirty and you're out there in a tent in a blockade, because that is what gets your blood flowing. And we also need the people who do stuff that I hate to do, the research, the spreadsheets, the Excel, you know, all that kind of thing. People who like to do media releases. There's room for people in a coalition, as well as individual action plans, there's room for people of different skills. And diversity is a good word. You had that word in there. And it was my intention, and when Taryn and I met, and we met with a couple other people to talk about who was going to be in this summit and presenting information, it was, let's bring a diversity of voices. And I think that's made it a lot stronger as a summit, as well as all that diversity. And again, it's like, it's been really cool because it's been all these people coming from different places, and what you would think is different ways of thinking, but all of the ideas are coming here. It's like, yeah, we do need a new forest framework that respects nature, respects Indigenous systems, and gives communities power. People from who were traditionally in government 40 years ago are saying that. People who work on the ground in forestry are saying that. Union guys are saying that. So diversity, yeah, absolutely. Can I ask, maybe this is for Tracey, because she spoke about coalitions. Where does leadership come in? How does it fit when we're talking about coalitions?
So how I think of a coalition, I guess maybe how I think of power and organizing power is really organizing groups of leaders. And so I personally defined a leader not as a set of practices, but if that person actually has followers. So kind of the proof is in the pudding, because there's a lot of people who say they are like leaders, or they have leadership skills or whatever. But if I don't see a lot of people behind you, I'm I'm going to question that. So when I think about leadership in a coalition, I think it's a group of leaders who actually have followings, joining together and doing something, because otherwise there's no power. And it's just not an organized group. So but that is also coming from my experience of organizing organizations. Like, I'm very interested in organizing institutions because I'm a student of history, and it's very easy to see how they can either be great creators of a new world or great destroyers of people and societies. So because of that institutional power, they're an incredible tool to harness, but they're also places of belonging. And, many of our institutions, we don't even really think about, our faith groups are, school groups are community centers, these places that are really foundational for people's everyday lives. Like, that's where you find the leaders that actually know how to motivate people. Because they're the leaders of people who are involved in something just because they care about that thing, that they want to be part of it. It's in their neighborhood. It's offering them the services that they need. It's this cornerstone of their relationships. Many of the people that I organized through the Hospital Employees Union had these two really important institutional relationships in their lives: their Catholic parish and their labor union. And so finding the leaders that are in those types of organizations where people are showing up voluntarily and want to be there, that to me is like looking for a leader.
Mary, did you have anything to add on leadership?
No, I really like the definition that Tracey gave of like people with followers. I'm thinking a little bit about how it's been complicated in contemporary times, because there are people with followers now in like a digital sense. That aren't traditional institutions, but still absolutely meet that criterion. So
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it's not at all to undermine, but it's like we need to think more expansively about like who is a leader in British Columbia. And how to engage people with followings that are really diverse. Absolutely.
One of my friends was saying, I think the new institutions of East Van are breweries, dispensaries, and yoga studios. And I was like, very interesting. And I know that we did act on that a bit with Dogwood. Mary and I both were organizing yoga studios, and Mary's organizing a cafe, the people who hung out in a cafe as a group. But really, you're looking for a group. The other thing that I was thinking of is Marshall Gantz's definition of leadership. And leadership, according to him, is finding shared purpose in the face of uncertainty. And I think that there's a really nice richness there where as a leader, you don't have the answer, but you have the willingness to commit to the people to find it together, and a willingness to show up and try again and sort of be transformed in an uncertain time.
Ooh. Can I share a quick story?
Yeah.
It comes from yesterday, where I was facilitating a meeting of people who are interested in being in the founding committee for Language Partners BC. So it's this organization, we've got 600-700 people in our supporter list. We've been operating for 5 years, but we've never actually become an organization, official registered organization. So these people were on the meeting, and I'm describing, let's get on this process together because I don't want to do it alone. And people were a little bit anxious about it because it's well, can you tell us what exactly the roles are going to be? Can you tell us kind of how it's going to go exactly? And I kept being I don't know, I've never done it. And it's a good thing that I've never done it because it means that we're going to do it together and we're going to figure it out. But I don't think I've had a lot of practice in that. And so trusting myself and the group that we will figure it out. And
That's great.
Yeah. Not being told how to do it, but being I trust myself and I trust this group. And that practice in democracy is really important to me right now.
Yeah, I mean, we've discovered, Taryn and I won't specifically say what it was, but we discovered that when there's just one person who's doing a lot of the work and taking on most of the responsibility and figuring things out on their own, then things kind of fall apart if that person leaves. If you put your eggs all in one basket, whereas if it's a group effort, it makes a difference. And uncertainty is certainly something that people are dealing with in the forest industry right now. Workers, there's a huge amount of uncertainty for forest workers right now. They don't know where things are going. And they look at people who are going around with banners and signs that say protect old growth as potential threats. And so that's why it's really important that we do bring people who are involved, different people who are involved in these issues into the group so that they feel like they have a say and they feel like they're not having things imposed on them. And it's not just about somebody else's agenda, that it is really a coalition. And one of the things I wanted to ask too, we're talking about power. So how do we define power? What does that mean? What is power? A question?
How do you define it?
That's not a question I've ever considered before. It just came up and I thought to myself, well, this is something that I need to think about as we move forward. What does that mean, power? And so, we're talking about how do we influence the decision makers? Is somebody who has the decision-making authority, is that the power? Is it the people who influence the decision makers? Are they the ones with the power? Is power a hammer? Or is it a whisper?
Ooh.
It's everything.
Well, I have my kind of canned answer to this question.
I would like to hear the canned answer.
Do you know how to say power in French or Spanish?
Shoot.
No.
Mary, do you know?
Pouvoir.
What does it mean? It's a verb, right?
To be able to, yeah.
To be able to. So I think of power as the ability to act. So whoever has the lever, who actually can make the decision, has the ability to act. But of course, that's in a web of relationships, as you alluded to, that there are influence to power. And that's why we create a power analysis, to figure out who actually have the ability to act, how can we influence them, but also how can we actually build our own power and claim the power that's ours. I think that's a lot of it, is we have, like Mary was alluding to, most of us have experienced a lot of power over where we're bossed around, or someone's making the decision and not consulting us, or we don't have control over what's happening. But I think that we have an opportunity here with this coalition to claim some of the power that we have as individuals, to not just like allow it to happen and to change our relationship with action and think about power as action, the ability to act. So we have, like you were saying, we all have the ability to act in so many different ways. And if we're learning from each other and sharing and acting in a coalition or a collaborative way, we can all bring that unique power that we have and strengthen each other. I kind of think about it as weaving a tapestry. And eventually it's like thick enough to hold something, right? If it has enough threads running through it.
Tracey, you spoke of the meeting after the 24th coalition building meeting. Where would you see this power analysis coming in? How soon down the road would something like that take place? If a
So
got from
how I see the next meeting going. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
How I see the next meeting going is just finding out who's kind of interested and curious about being part of a coalition, and then hearing from people on what that might look like and what they're interested in. Because that's something I can't quite predict. And depending on who's at the table, yeah, we have a lot to think about. So how I was imagining that first call was a super relational one, and one where we start right off the top building relationships between people and communities. So maybe giving space for people to share what they're working on, and just like starting a collaborative, just curious, relationship-based meeting right off the top. But then start looking at who's interested in those and who has those unique skill sets. Because I know like tons of the organizations that might want to be involved would like to collaborate on things like that. So yeah, I think it's, I don't have a schedule of how the meetings will roll out, but I think it depends on who takes responsibility for things, and brings their ideas and resources to the table and how they resonate with other people. I think it's kind of up to us to all be as interesting as possible to kind of get people, keep people's energy going, and express as much curiosity in the other people as possible. As we've talked about in other meetings and in the Organizing for Change work that we've done together, I think the goal of those first meetings is just to be really attentive, super curious, really attentive to each other. Because as I said, we don't want to create an oligarchy of like the 5 people who set the tone, and then anyone who doesn't agree with it just puts their energy elsewhere and we don't get anywhere. So I think it's worth it to spend the time to really get to know each other and find more people to help you two out.
Yeah,
That'd be good.
Numbers are going to be interesting. I have been involved, like Mary said before, in messy coalitions. Messy because we were all of the same like mind, and then we just battled to be the top oligarch. And we've also, I know, but we're all the same one. Also, Jennifer and I, we've often, people just planning this forum. What are you doing next? What are we doing next? What is the next move? Just like Mary said, it's up to us to decide as a coalition, not Jennifer and I. So this is going to be very, a relief to share some of the responsibility with everybody who's interested. Can numbers become too large? How do you foresee this? What if 30, 40, 50 people show up on the 24th?
What if 5,000 do?
How do we organize that? That's organizing for change. That's power.
I mean, the coalition I was a part of before represented 750,000 people in the province. So that's what Metro Vancouver Alliance group of organizations can represent, right? Like the coalition of organizations in Victoria represents, 35 organizations and all of their members. So we can organize big numbers using a coalition approach. But the key thing, as Mary described, is a coalition is only as strong as the organization's ability to move their members. And And so, but I think that we should just keep building. So I'm not afraid of big numbers. And if there's 8 people and they're the right people, I welcome that discussion too. I have we're looking for leaders. We're looking for people who want to be a part of something that is bigger than themselves, where they understand that if they put their energy into it, they personally will become larger than the sum of the parts, right? And I just want to say one more thing before I kind of open up a new question. Jennifer, you were saying, we have the forestry industry under so much pressure right now, and workers who are really worried and suffering and facing uncertainty. And I was just thinking that, like, a big part of how we organize a coalition is looking for win-wins and looking for ways where it doesn't have to be a zero-sum win-lose game, because that doesn't serve us as a province. It doesn't serve our communities. And so I think that having a coalition like this is such a special opportunity, and taking the time to really listen and hear from those groups can really shape our strategy, and can make sure that, this forest strategy is also part of our just recovery strategy, and the recovery from the pandemic and transitioning to a new type of economy. And like the relationships that we build in this have repercussions that could ripple out into a really exciting new future. And so I'm really excited that you brought that up.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, okay, we have this place that we're converging to, but there's not one thing in here. There's a lot of things for lots of different people. And and so all of these lanes will get, like you say, zeros. It's not just one thing that's being won, right? And it's a win for a lot of people in a lot of different ways, and that's important. One of the things that I've found about leadership is some people have the definition that a leader is somebody who will tell you what to do, and I think that's what a lot of people are looking for, is they're looking to be told what to do and how to do it and when to do it and what direction to go, and they're not they don't understand, or they're not familiar with the group model of different people coming together and creating something together. They are looking for somebody to follow. They've been trained to be followers for whatever reason, and I think that's something I would really like people to realize, that they can be a leader without having to put in this colossal, ginormous, gigantic effort in getting 75,000 people following them. A leader can be somebody who does something small, and it's just, you stood up and you've done it, and that makes you a leader. And people, it's like, there's this video, I can't remember where I saw it. It might have been Organizing for Change. There's this, it's all over YouTube, it's all over social media. It's this festival, this music festival. There's this guy standing out, he's kind of dancing all by himself, and he's all crazy and wacky, and nobody's around him, right? He's got the grass all to himself, and everybody's sitting really far away. And then all of a sudden, one guy comes in and joins him. And then more people come individually, and they come and join, right? It was just like the one guy doing something that made him feel really good, and it was really satisfying for him. That's a leader. And he wasn't reaching out to other people going, follow me, and he wasn't expecting other people to follow him. He was just doing what felt right and what felt good, and that's a form of leadership too.
Absolutely. Yep. And even like the first follower who joined him, I mean, I think there's a leader too, who's like, all right, guys, let's come and join this guy.
Yeah.
Let's do this. Let's get on board. And so often these people are, they are the people who answer the phones, who know what's going on. They are the people who make sure that which printout is on the top of the desk. The people who are exercising leadership, it shows up in ways that are so subtle that most of us don't recognize them, but they're also the people that if they say something, people listen. And it doesn't always show up as like front of the room leadership. In fact, I think it rarely does. Yeah.
Yeah, but you don't have to be at the front of the room making speeches if that's not your thing. That's not the only way to get involved. So did you guys, we've had a really good conversation today. I think this is a really good start to helping people to understand how they might get involved in the direction that we're going. Did you guys have any closing thoughts?
Maybe I'll just share that I do think it's interesting that as like a lover of trees, I have an Instagram account named after trees, that this provincial forest fight is not something that I've engaged in. And I have to think about like why that is. And I think part of it is like how I've, glanced off of it before. And it's like social media posts about like how bad things are. It's canvassers, sometimes like door knockers, telling me how bad things are. And so I showed those like emotions, and the inhibiting emotions is where I've been at for a long time, of just like disaster. Oh my gosh, like I'm paralyzed. I can't do anything. No one's telling me how anything can be done. Maybe sign this, maybe give money, but like that's not very clear. I'm not really clear on how that's going to solve it. So I was really excited by this, because Jennifer, you like reached out and you offered me something clear to do. And you didn't sell me about like, this is going to solve the problem. It was just like, do you want to be involved with people who are like figuring it out? And this is like the first step I've been able to take into this. And so my hope is that like, I don't know, people keep doing that to me, being like, here, get involved. You don't have to have all the answers. We don't have all the answers. We're figuring it out. We trust ourselves and we trust the group to figure it out. And that we continue to extend that to other people in BC who maybe have the same like aversion.
Thank you for that, Mary. I think that's a really good thing to point out. I'm just going to make one final comment, and then I'm going to ask for comments from Taryn and Tracey to close off. And it's a subject that I want to approach with sensitivity, because it is something that I'm learning about, and also the fact that none of us are Indigenous people, the four of us here today, and that's something that I can't claim to know everything about, and I can't speak for Indigenous people. And one of the questions I put to some of the Indigenous people who are in the summit is, how do we help? How do we work together? And I got some really good answers, and that I think that should be something that we are considering. I don't like the word should, and I just used it. So I think it's something that I believe is important for us to consider as we move forward, as just like you sort of expressed it very well, Mary, inviting Indigenous people to get involved. One of the phrases that I heard speaking about Indigenous involvement in forestry and decision making, somebody said, they were talking about all the consultations that the BC government has been doing, and how they want to consult for another year with Indigenous people before they do anything about old growth. And this person said, participation, not consultation. Participation, not consultation. And I like the way you just expressed it, Mary. It's an invitation, and I'm hoping that we can let Indigenous people know that there's an invitation here, and we'll find some structured way to do it as well. But I wanted to put that out there. Karen.
I've heard that similar. How I heard it from our First Nations friends here in Peachland is the government allows participation with First Nations if they are pro-logging. The government just asks for consultation from First Nations if they are opposed to clear cutting in their land. So it's I think any community has supporters of industry, and any community has ones that aren't as avid. So it doesn't matter whose community, First Nations or your local community. I just wanted to say to Tracey, I really feel for you about how you really tried to save one certain area and you end up having to now wait for 77 other cut blocks. I know that
It's
feeling.
exhausting. It's an exhausting challenge, and I know that
It's very
many
deflating.
communities are well into it as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've only been working in our community for about 4 years, and 3 years ago I was challenged at a meeting and said, Taryn, we've got to do something. We've got to call for a public inquiry or take somebody to court or sue somebody or petition or march. Because what have you done? We've done nothing. Our water's still dirty. And it's very it's deflating, to think that you've been working very hard and things are still the same or worse. And people expect one person to be responsible. We really need a coalition, and I'm looking really forward to working with one.
Yeah.
In the future.
I think that we have an opportunity to create a really interesting and exciting culture to be a part of in a coalition like this. My brother just slipped this into my hands before I came in. He was like, plug this book.
Yeah.
This is a workbook called Decolonize First. And I highly recommend it, Michelle Nahani. And so I'm not going to go too much into it because this is her work and she deserves to be paid for it. I know that she has a really interesting mutual aid support promotion happening right now. So if you buy this, it also money goes to support. I actually can't remember off the top of my head what it's to support, but it's good. So check that out. But like that kind of work, doing that work up front and changing ourselves and our willingness to learn in a new way. I think just we have a huge opportunity here to listen to voices that have not had a seat at the decision-making table, and making sure that that's what this coalition is about. For me, I'm excited about reading together with folks. I'm excited about exchanging ideas. I'm excited about receiving mentorship and sharing what I've learned and creating a reciprocal relationship through this coalition. But I'm also really excited about the local work that needs to happen on the ground to create the organizations that can be part of a coalition and to create the organizations in local communities that can be part of that. So for me, that's what I'm really interested in strengthening and where I want to put my energy, finding those local leaders who want to do something locally and supporting them. So that really excites me, and I'm so excited to learn from you all.
Beauty. Mary, did you have a final comment?
No, I'm good for now. Thank you, Jennifer.
Okay. Yeah, and I just wanted to say too, like we've been talking a lot about a coalition, but that's not the only goal that we're moving towards when it comes to the session on the 24th. There's lots of other ideas. We're looking for ideas. What sort of strategies, tasks, tactics, ideas people have. So if you have ideas for something other than a coalition that you want to bring forward on the 24th, that is very welcome too. Coalition is just one lane that can lead us to that convergence point. So please, I encourage people to bring ideas. Thank you guys so much. This has been an excellent session, and I'm looking forward to more. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Taryn. Thank you, Tracy. Rock on.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.